Hello, welcome back. Today I'm working up a sketch from the Isles of Scilly. I arrived in St. Mary's and hired a bicycle. I'm just putting in a little bit of a hazy sky by using Naples yellow at the bottom, working up to French ultramarine that I've warmed up slightly with Viridian because it's just to foil the sky. I'm actually more interested in the lovely clear water and the foreground. So for continuity, I'm putting the sandy surface in at the front using a mixture of Naples yellow and Azilian crimson, so that I've got one colour at the top and also a trace of it at the bottom. I'm making a biscuity colour for the sand. Oh, I just like the idea of the seat there that you could look out. Now whilst that's drying, I can add some of the boat, so I'm going to pick a smaller brush, number 2 brush, and the lovely homemade boat has got wood that's painted white and wood that's left varnished. And the first thing I'm going to put in is the bow, the front of it, in burnt sienna, and then I could always highlight certain parts of it. What I also liked is the fact that there's a little cuddy on it, a little area that's covered, and the person's got all their equipment in there. And then there's a mast, but it's a little bit of a different colour, so I'm just adding some yellow ochre to the paint. And the mast is just shown as 2 straight lines. And then there's a little bit of rust at the bottom of the boat, which I'm going to add a little bit of Venetian red to. Now the side of the boat is in shade and the back of it is in brilliant sunshine. So I'm going to get some very light blue left over from the sky and dilute it and use that as shadow. It doesn't quite go up to the top where it reaches the back. And then at the back I need it a little bit stronger because there is a diagonal line across. The seat has got quite dark grass because it's in shade, so I'm using Payne's grey and sap green as the starting point, and I'm going to warm it up a little bit with some yellow ochre, and I'm going to drop it in under the seat. I need it to be dark to make the white show up a lot. I'm going to clean the brush off, and I've got flowers this end, so I'm just taking the brush for a little dance, going around, giving it an uneven edge. Now I need a small brush and the dark again to go between the planks. And then just drop a little bit of paint into that line I've already made, and it'll give the suggestion of plants growing in it. And the same with the next one up. And in this case it's lighter at one end, so I'm going in with the sap green. And I've got hardly anything at the top. I'm going to use the sap green again, but I'm warming it up with chrome yellow. And the plants aren't growing evenly, so I'm just taking the paint for a walk. And I'm getting some water clean brush and just losing it all to an infinite edge. I'm just going to put the brush on its side and go up to the boat, and then just take it sideways using the side of the brush. Just to make marks to show that whatever it's growing quite thinly. And I don't want the same colour next to the wood, so I'm going to go back in with some green now. Now I'm going to let that dry. So moving on, I can move on to the island. I've got the green already, so I can put that on. And I'll just use my finger to rub it back a bit at the top because it seems to have this same reddy brown plant on there. So I'm just going to go the other side of the rock a little bit. I'm returning to the Naples yellow again to add the beaches on the two islands in the background. I'm adding the beaches first because it's easy to accidentally not leave enough room. So I've made a pencil line at the top and the bottom. I need to make them quite bright. It is white sand, but it's going to be next to other colours, so I want it to show. And there's a few rocks in the way, but I'll just make a line of sand. And then can add the rocks afterwards. And the same as a little bit here, just the other side of the island. So having done that, I now make a homemade grey to put in the rocks on this delightful little island. All the paint recipes will be in the description. But it's slightly more grey on top than it is at the bottom, so I'm going in very gently, and it's going to need 2 coats. But I'm getting the shape with the first coat, and then some of the rock going down slightly pinker. So I'll just change the bias of the grey by adding a little bit more Zillion crimson. But you can't do rocks in one coat. You've got to get the shape and form of them. A little bit more pointy bits. And then where it goes into the water, it's actually almost dark brown. But now I've got islands in the background that are much darker green because they're further away. So I'm mixing the greens I used for the seat up with each other or around the seat and just putting them in. And there's some rock on top. I'm just adding a little bit of yellow ochre because I don't want the whole island to be the same, leaving space for the rock. And then moving across, and the next one's got several different colours. So I'm just making the top of that one slightly more yellow ochre, the dark green in, and then add chrome yellow every now and again, and that will chemically separate the greens. Just make it look a bit more natural. So before I put the sea in, I'm just going to make this island a bit bolder so that I get the tones right. Now the sea is very turquoise in the Isles of Scilly because there's no muddy rivers going into it, and the sand's white. So I'm going to mix cobalt turquoise with a little bit of French ultramarine and put the first coat in it. I'm going to do the sea in 2 coats because it's a big area and it will have currents and tidal influences on it. So changing colour slightly, just slightly, making sure I don't accidentally go over the white bench. Now I've already got plants here, so I'm going up and down around the plants. Because they'll look better if it's not completely turquoise underneath them. And the water's a bit darker near the island, so I'm adding more French ultramarine. And then again, going up and down around the plants and grasses. So we start with this one here, which looks quite interesting. And it's 2 shades of green. So I'm using the tip of the brush to go from a central point and changing colour to a lighter green. So I'm just mixing more chrome yellow with the paint. I'm just putting on a few little knobbly bits. And then I've got a very dark shadow. And then go back to a mid-green for a plant that's quite similar but more bushy. Not quite the same. And dry the brush off. And this time going with slightly darker in between, just to make a change. And then I've got more orangey brown plants on the sand. So I'm just using the mix I used earlier for this area. Just making little marks, little areas of plant. But it is mostly sand in this area. Not much growing there. Every now and again you get something's taken hold. And then something entirely different again on the back of the boat. So I'll put the seed heads in first with a fairly dry brush and then go back to the plants at the bottom. It's a little microclimate there. So now going in with the green last. I'm just putting it in sparingly. And there's another little clump of them going further out, so just put that in. And then more plants just hanging onto the sand, just in little rivulets. And bringing them forward, just do dot dash, and then just do random streaks again. And then in the area of the boat, there's something that's got a stronger hold, more bluey green leaves. So just mix some French ultramarine with the greens I've already used, and that's got purple flowers. Nothing too complicated, leaving room for the flowers, which I can't put in until the green's dried. And then there's some lighter green things in front, so it would make sense to put them in now and then the colours emerge. I don't necessarily want a hard line at that point. And take that out to infinity with water. Having put the sea and the suggestion of the little islands in, I now need to make things a bit bolder. So I'm going to start with the sea in this far corner, make it a bit brighter, which will make the sand show more. I'm also putting a second coat of paint on the hillside behind it. And the paint won't run because I've got the beach in between. And there's a few things sticking up. Just doing a few upright strokes. So far away I can't say what they are. And then moving on to the next island. It's going in a little bit darker again, but varying the strokes. So I've got some sap green in the dark green mix, but I just want them to stand out a little bit more. But the first thing when you're doing something like this is to claim the shapes. And it seems to have less on top. But I don't want it to look odd, so I'm going to put a second coat of paint on that as well, of yellow ochre. And then moving up to the other island that's got rocks on top. So I'm just adding some lighter green, just so it doesn't look like a green triangle, it looks more shapely. Now the rocks, I'm going to use a homemade grey. I don't need much because they are a long way away. I just need to make the shape of them. So I'll start light, and then when it's dry I'll add a few shadows. But I'm not covering all the paper, I'm just making little dabs because they are individual rocks. And now I can use the same paint to come forward to this very interesting shaped pile of rocks here. Well, one rock that's been eroded. And again, not covering the whole paper, leaving a few gaps. And then some of the rock at the bottom is a different colour. Might be because it's got growth on it. So I'm just adding a little bit of yellow ochre at random, and then I'm going to drop the homemade grey into it. And then it gets down to the bottom, it gets quite brown. So I'll put the brown in, and then I'm going to drop some blue in, just to subdue it a bit. Don't want to make it too dark because it needs to blend into the scene, not stand out too much. It's the point at the top that is the focal point. Now while that's drying, I can do the water on the left hand side, still with a small brush, because I want to mist the beach. And this is the turquoise and French ultramarine mix again. And it's got different colours. There's streaks of actual turquoise, which is always a pleasure for the artist to find. So I'm still going with the first mix all the way around here, and the first mix up to the bench, because I want a good contrast. I'll take the stroke sideways away from the bench and around the plants. Now I'll just go in with some turquoise. And then back with the first colour to butt up to it. Doesn't matter if they bleed a little bit, it'll look more natural. And then, as I've still got size 1 brush, I'm going to go down between the plants and then take the turquoise further to the right, and then go back with the darker blue again. You could put latex where the plants are if you wanted to, but I thought I'd do it this way, and I know not all of you have got latex, so if I'm travelling as well, which I did on this occasion, I don't take a jar of latex with me when I go out painting. I've got enough to carry. And there's still some more turquoise flowing through. It's just a different channel of water. It's got different currents in it, catching the wind a different way. And again, go around the grasses. So I'm just going to go up and down. There's grass growing on the edge. And then quickly, before it's dried, go across the top sideways so I don't get a line. So I'll put a line down halfway and then take it out. No more paint on the brush, just moving what is left on the brush and giving a little flick. Just to give some shape and form to whatever it is. Reloading the brush again with a slightly different mix of green and carefully going round the bow again, the front of the boat, and then taking it up straight away so that it's not a hard line. Changing the colour again, and the greenery in my sketch goes all the way back to the little cuddy that's full of all the sailors' belongings. I'm going to use some lemon yellow just to show that the sun's coming from one direction, and just drop that into the still wet paint. Bring it forward a little bit. I'm working my way round the bow of the boat, just putting in different plants as I find them. But I want a little bit of variation, so if I put the yellow in at the bottom, it will have a chemical reaction. It's like opposite magnets. It pushes the other paint away, which will give me some shape and form. I've just given the grass a minute or two to dry, and while I'm in that area I can see that there is a piece of wood on the boat that's darker brown, and the shadow cast, so I can do that in the darker brown as well. This makes it a little bit more interesting. And some of the varnish is coming off the boat, so I'm going to use a little bit of reddy brown and just put in a few lines and then water them out, just to show that there's some weathering and aging there. And I'm going to go over the mast again. Make that a bit brighter. The next stage, I've got grass on the right hand side, so I'm going to bring out my rigger because it's different. You can use an ordinary brush if you haven't got a rigger. The rigger, the hairs are much longer, so for grass I'll bring it out. Just put some Naples yellow on it and go up from the bottom. Sometimes you just have to stop and let areas dry. It's the only way you get a good result, because you don't want all the paint to bleed into each other. And I'm now picking up some of this red. The rest of the area is mostly sand, but there's a few little hints of things growing. So just going to get the rigger again. Just make a few dots and dashes every now and again. Nothing more than that. To pick up different colours off the palette. Don't ever be in a rush to clean your palette. You'll come back to it. Just build up layers of foliage, giving a lost and found edge to the boat. And then at the back, there's more plants. Not using a very wet brush here, it's a dry brush. So sort of cover the area. And then I want to put a little bit more detail on the red I put in earlier. That it has got sort of curly top. It's not just different coloured smudge on the sand. It's got shape and form. Just going back, not reloading the brush, but just using the brush till the paint's exhausted. It's the best crop on this beach, going everywhere. And I want to separate it from the brown wood of the boat, so I've just got more Alizarin crimson, and I'm just putting paint down and then moving the paint, just to give a difference. Now, still going very gently, just firming up places that there's more green in front of the bench, and that looks like traditional grass. So I'm just using the brush sideways with the lemon yellow, and then I've got more of the red crop creeping in. Red and green always complement each other. A little bit more detail on the dark under the bench, So I'm just putting in lines and then I'm going to move them just very gently. And then a few diagonal ones so it doesn't look too regimented. Purple, I'm just doing little blobs, and then I'm going to go back on top with rose madder and just go back over the top. That if I'd just done one or two flowers you wouldn't notice it, so I need to be a bit over the top just so that they show. And then in the middle there's some yellowy grass, so I can use the yellow ochre. Just make a clump of yellowy grass. Just breaks up the foreground nicely. And then I just want to highlight the foliage behind with a slightly different colour and slightly more detail. And then I've got a lot of shading by the boat that I need to deal with. I'm just going to go in with a little bit of grey. In this case it's Payne's grey, just round the gunwale. I think I'm all right with this brush. And just put a line in. And that line goes all the way to the bottom. And I'll make the shadow a bit darker, which I'll put in. And then the hull of the boat is slightly blue. And I think I was a bit timid when I did it, so I'm going to do it again slightly stronger, just to make it slightly different colour. And that brush is rather wet, so I'm going to take some off. Just makes it slightly shady. And then I've got to do the collection of things inside. I can't be sure what they are, so I'm just going to do different shapes that are shady. There's a bottle with a red top, that's very handy. A bit more red in. And then I think we just use some blue to show shade. Some boats are made out of sheets of plywood and others are wooden planks. But they've all got reinforcing there. And you can't see the bottom of it. So I'm just going to put a little bit more green so it's got a lost edge. I'm now back to the rocks in the middle, which need a little bit of shape and form and shadow. So to start with, I've got a big shadow on the right. So I'm just putting in a dark triangle and a dark triangle on the top. Then a couple more dark triangles. And a few more dark triangles down the bottom, and then a dark rectangle. Nothing too complicated. And then another triangular shape, and it's all coming together. So now I need to do the same again with a slightly different colour, slightly more brown, and just separate the slabs of rock near the waterline. So I'm just putting in odd shapes just to show that it is rock, and they're much smaller on top. And then there's a few little extra ones I can do there. I don't want to make the whole thing dark. And the far island, I've got to do the same, but because it's further away, it needs to be more delicately done. And I've got two white strings over the mast, so I've accidentally painted over one. So I'm going to put some white gouache on. And I'll do its friend in white gouache as well. And I think the rust could be a bit more orangey just to break up the picture a bit. So just putting it on. And now I'm going to put some more on the grasses because they've had a chance to dry, and I did them in Naples yellow. So I'm now going to put a little bit of yellow ochre on just to give a slight change in tone. Make sure that there's no white paper showing. And the dark area under the cuddy, I think there's something very dark in this. I'm going to do one more dark line just to separate it. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video and that you'll get to St Mary's yourself quite soon. Thank you very much for watching.